Hey guys, welcome back to Refactoring My Christianity. On this episode, I'll be talking with Alexis from Our Hearts Are Restless, her YouTube channel. I found her because she was talking about her conversion story. She was initially a Mormon, grew up a Mormon, became atheist, and then ended up becoming Catholic, and we'll touch on her whole journey. I just want to say at the outset to all the people listening, and also to Alexis, I'm sorry because there was a issue with a technical glitch that was going on with recording, so we couldn't really get it as in depth as I wanted to because it sort of cut with the flow. So I really apologize to that, and hopefully next time, because I would love to have her back on because there's so many things I wanted to dive more into in the future of her conversion story and getting more in depth into all the family dynamics as well. But it was still a great episode. I really enjoyed talking to her. She has amazing insights. I learned more about Mormonism and how she became atheist and talking about the foundations around all of that. So I think you all will enjoy this episode. So let's just get right into it. Here we go. Hey guys, I'm here with Alexis Gontan, who has her own YouTube channel. I think it's called Our Restless Heart, if I'm not mistaken.
Our hearts are restless.
Hearts Are Restless. Sorry, I'm already started off and I'm butchering the name.
No
But
worries.
it's because in the beginning, I have normally show notes right up, but I didn't for some reason pull them up. But that's just the name of the game. But thank you for being here, Alexis. I know I came across you with your faith and your conversion story, and I really liked seeing your conversion from you started off as a Mormon, then became an atheist, and then ended up in the Catholic Church of all places. But I'm glad you made it here. But take me through like your home life of what got you becoming a Mormon early on in your life. It sounds like from what I was initially seeing, it was something that your family kind of got into. So just let's dive into Mormonism as a whole and how that faith was for you.
Sure. So it was my dad, actually. So my parents are Filipino, and I was born in the Philippines, and culturally, Filipinos are Catholic. I think 81% or 82% of the population in the Philippines are Catholic. And so my parents were Catholic by tradition. They baptized me when I was a child. Same with my brother and my sister. But we never really went to church. And I didn't know that my dad was Mormon until later on, until we went to Canada. We didn't really live as Mormons while we were in the Philippines. And so I moved to Canada when I was 7. And my dad converted in his 20s and was basically a secret Mormon. He would go to mass with my mom, and then apparently one day, like, my mom noticed that he had a Book of Mormon in his bag and was like, "What's this?" And she converted because she wanted one religion in the house. She was Catholic, and she was taught by nuns all her life, from kindergarten to university, basically, until university. And yeah, so it was kind of hard for her to become Mormon. And she had a great devotion to Our Lady. Like, she did the 54-day novena and things like that. So my mom was pretty Catholic. And my grandparents on my dad's side are very, very Catholic. And so when I grew up, I had no idea about about any of that. And when we went to Canada, my parents decided to raise us Mormons, and so I was baptized when I was 8 into the church, and then we started going to church, to the Mormon Church, once a week, and then eventually, and so the missionaries would come about once a week to teach us the doctrines of the church. And then about when I was 13, 14, my parents wanted to move to Vancouver because they wanted to change a bit, and they really wanted to live more of a Mormon life, because we would go to church once a week and then that would be that. We didn't do anything else. Like, I had no idea about all the other things, like baptism for the dead, that kind of stuff. I had no idea. So yeah, we moved to Vancouver, and that's when I became really devout Mormon, and it kind of helped that there was a boy that I liked at that time. Uh, and it was really, really good for me. Like, I really loved it. I had a good experience, and I followed it pretty blindly. There's this, I think it's part of Filipino culture too. Authority is very important, and you follow your parents, kind of thing. And even though I was, at that time starting to question some things, I just followed my parents, and I quickly became what they called a My Mate's president, which is the president of the group of women between the ages of 15 to 16, 17. Um, and yeah, and then I went to the temple. You have to get like a temple recommend for that, where they interview you. And so I went to seminary, which is basically like catechism, and you start that when you're in high school. And so you would go wake up in the morning at 7 7 in the morning, or 7:30 until 8:30 every day, Monday to Friday. You would be basically catechized the Mormon way. And then on Saturdays or Friday evenings, there would be, events, dances, things like that. And then on Sunday, you would go to church for 3 hours because you have sacrament meeting.
Oh,
And
wow.
then and then you get taught for an hour in your group for younger people. If you're in the younger people, you have Relief Society for the women, priesthood for the men. And yeah, so it's 3 hours of church every Sunday. And so when you're Mormon, you're very active, and it's part of Mormon life. And what's one of the good things I think about Mormons is they're very, very close, or they at least try to have a very close community.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's what it sounds like from what I've read about or learned about the Mormon life. At least their love of community and how they foster community seems like it's a main driving factor, maybe, of keeping people in the faith as a whole.
yeah,
And it's really fascinating to see, because Mormon as a whole, or LDS, or whatever they want to be called, it's they do. I have to give them props. They do a lot of great things, at least in society these days, with the secular culture, and you have
yeah.
Mormons fighting back with putting out pretty good content when it comes to that type of stuff, with different types of books. But let's talk about like the faith of, because now you're diving into Mormonism as a whole. So for people that don't, say me as a cradle Catholic, haven't really understood Mormonism, or doesn't have really have a grasp of it, a total grasp. So you hear like the remnants of people on the outside talking about it, maybe a little more disparaging than they should be, and they kind of paint it, if you paint it in a negative light. How would you describe the faith of the Mormon faith as a whole?
Okay, first off, I want to say that when you're Mormon, and I'm sure this is the same for many other people in different religions, when you're Mormon, you believe that you're a Christian. Like, you don't believe that you're some sort of cult or anything like that, or a sect. You believe that you're Christian. And that was the same when I was Mormon. I thought everybody believed exactly as I believed, which is normal, especially when you're younger. But so in Mormonism, basically, not too long after Christ left, there was a great apostasy. And so basically the church just fell apart. And up until when Joseph Smith came. And the whole thing is that Joseph Smith, at that time, he wanted to know which church to join, because there were so many churches popping up. And apparently all of the churches were an abomination. He was to establish a new church by God, and that would be what we now call the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the thing about Mormons too that is essential is that heaven is really different. It's not like there is no hell. There is a place called outer darkness, And then there's the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, and the celestial kingdom. So there are three kingdoms, and you want to go to the top. And at the top, there are three other levels. And at the very, very top, you get exaltation, in which you basically become God. So for Mormons, Jesus was someone like you and me. He was a normal man that basically reached exaltation. And so that's what we're doing here on Earth, basically. We're basically going through life to get to that, to be exalted beings. And there is pre-existence in Mormonism. So Christ was a person that was born in heaven, in the celestial kingdom, to another person, to Elohim, who was another person that went through the whole process. And basically God, so let's put it in simpler terms, God wanted to know what we should do. Jesus was there. Lucifer was there. Lucifer had an idea. Jesus had an idea. And Jesus' idea was better. And so he was chosen to be the son. And you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lot. Here's the thing. It's a lot of stuff. I don't want to confuse everybody, and I don't want to confuse myself too. It's been a while.
No, I mean, I think you painted a good enough understanding, at least from what I've gathered, also while researching and going down, just out of curiosity of, you see a lot of people talking about Mormonism and their experience, and then coming to faith in Christ, the true church, and all that. And it's really fascinating because while you're in the faith, was there something in particular that was like gnawing at you, like, oh, this wasn't quite right? Because I know you went from, you were a Mormon, then you became atheist, and was that because if you look more into Mormonism and their belief that we were, there was God was a man at certain points, and then it if you start going back at some point when you talk to Mormons, there has to be a infinite, like an initial being of some sort. But
Yeah.
that's where the logical in my head was like that falls apart. Was there something that, like, in your experience, because you're probably in it, so it's probably harder for you to realize those inconsistencies when you're already, you see that with a lot of things where you're constantly being talked about, you're talking about it. And was there something that kind of stood out all of a sudden that clicked in your mind and was like, oh, now this, I can't believe this, and that led you down the path of, oh, I can't trust any of these types of religions, which then brought you into atheism? Or was that, or am I off base there?
There was, okay, so I was in a bubble, right? I was in a pretty good bubble. I mean, I did have friends that were not Mormons, but it was such a close-knit community. It wasn't until later when I met my future husband, my now husband, and it was through, because I was so in it, I never really asked questions. Like I said, like, I took authority, and that's another thing too with Mormonism. There is great authority, and you take it as it is. And so for the first time, my husband at the time, he's atheist, and we started talking, and it was the first time I had ever talked to an atheist in a way where it wasn't just fighting and it wasn't just arguing. He was asking questions about God. How is it possible that God can be good and let people suffer? That was one of the biggest questions, like, I couldn't answer. And I would just spout out Mormon answers. And like, we have emails of it, and like letters, physical letters about it. And like, I've read it, and it was just regurgitating what I had been taught. I would never really answer the question. And so with that question, especially on suffering, that was the trigger. So it wasn't any Mormon issue. It was mainly
It was more like a
God.
broader
It was it
broader
was the God issue,
topical.
because I had never asked, like, how is it possible that God exists, logically speaking, without having to ask from authority in the church or from the Bible,
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I would look back because I looked back at my life. So I was born with what's it called? Jejunal atresia, which is like a part of my intestines were closed, and I wasn't given much time to live. And luckily, I have been given that time. And then my mom and my dad, I had a sister, and she died at 2 because she also had like a complication, but much graver, and she suffered a lot, and so did my parents. And then my mom had another, like a miscarriage, and so I thought this through. I was like, okay, there's so much that happened to my parents. Like, yes, they're not perfect, like, but why? They love God, but why would he do that, kind of thing? And I had no answer, and I didn't get satisfactory answers from authority anyway, not even from my parents, unfortunately.
Because
And
I'm
the
sure
kind of
if
question,
like your foundation is not rooted in like the truth, it's kind of hard to kind of parse through those difficult, deep questions. And if your foundation is kind of shaky to begin with, when you're diving in and trying to go deeper with the faith that you've been given, and you can't really find those answers, it kind of leads you to like emptiness, I guess, or like grasping for straws, and it leaves you kind of, I guess, how you were, where you just don't have the answer.
yeah,
It leaves you
definitely.
distraught.
Definitely. I just like, I would ask my parents, I'd ask like church leaders, and I wouldn't get any answer. And it wasn't, I'm not saying that they were against asking those kinds of questions, but a little bit. You know what I mean? It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
it
Was
wasn't
frowned upon.
encouraged. Yeah, because church teaching is church teaching. Church teaching. Well, I can't speak. Church teaching. Um, yeah, so and my husband grew atheist. So he was atheist all his life, and asked these questions, and I couldn't answer him, and he gave me more satisfactory answers. At least at the time, I thought they made sense, and so I started looking into it. Like, why are there atheists? Like, I couldn't believe that. I had one family member that was atheist, and unfortunately, he is a bad person, and so to me, I was like, okay, well, I can't be atheist because that's,
Mm-hmm.
it was a prejudice, right? But I started to look into it. So I started reading Dawkins, I started reading Hitchens, listening to their stuff, that, especially at the time, it was the new atheists.
When that
And
big
that,
craze.
exactly. So that got the ball rolling. And, yeah, that's eventually I ended up leaving the church because I thought, well, if God doesn't exist, then that means Mormonism isn't true.
Yeah. So that you now, if God doesn't exist, and if you have that foundation of you can't really grasp or get the answers that you're seeking, so that probably led to the compounding effect of like, oh, then God must just not exist, period. And that led you to that atheist phase. And how long were you in that said atheist phase, would you
Um,
say?
I think it was between 2009 until 2014 is when my husband brought up the Catholic Church.
So it was a little ways. And I'm curious because I've gone through those atheistic phases where it's sort of like where you put more emphasis on material stuff, and it's kind of like it's honestly like dark and depressing sometimes. What was that like for that phase for you? Do you like reflect back on that being a dark time or an okay time, or how was that period for you?
After figuring out, or thinking I figured out that God didn't exist, I then went on to looking up stuff about Mormonism and why it's not true. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's when I thought, okay, that really is crazy. Like, I didn't know about that. There's a lot of Freemasonry in Mormonism that I didn't know. I didn't know Freemasonry was a thing. And even the fact that you can be Mormon, but you can also practice a different faith. Like you can have two. So more, it was well known that Joseph Smith was Mormon, but he was also a Freemason, a practicing Freemason, and that was okay.
Interesting.
And that's in the Articles of Faith, that you can practice whatever religion you want.
So theoretically, could you be a Mormon and also a Catholic at the same time?
Kind of, yeah. Or a Mormon and a Buddhist, a Mormon and a Mason, a Mormon and anything. You're free to practice or believe what you want.
Did they give reasons?
I think it was just an excuse for Joseph Smith. I think it was an excuse for Joseph Smith to practice Freemasonry, because there is a lot of Freemasonry, like
that's
from the temple endowments, like when you're sealed, your family, the clothes that you wear, from the gestures with the hands, it's all there. But when I became atheist, I became more confident in myself, because I was trying to seek the truth. And so I was a little happier because I didn't feel like I was just believing something because I believed it, which was how I felt when I was younger. And that's what I really loved about my husband, is that we're both looking for the truth. Like, no matter how crazy it is, you're humbled by truth, because it's always something that you never thought it would be. So at the time, like my relationship with my parents kind of, took a turn for the worst. I tried to remove my name from the records, which then the church sent me a letter saying, if we remove your name, then that means we're going to remove all of the blessings. So the sealing ceremony, you're going to be taken away from your parents, because Mormons believe in in families being together forever. So you, your wife, your children, you're going to be a family forever and ever. Yeah, so when you're sealed, you're with your family forever and ever and ever and ever. And it's the same with your children, spouses, and children, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes on and on. So for my parents, when they found out that I wanted my name removed and the church contacted them, it was devastating for them, because they wanted to keep me in their family in heaven, basically. And I was destroying that for them. So I didn't, there was a time, like, I didn't talk to them. Like, I moved to France. I got married, I moved to France, and I didn't talk to them for like a year, or very little. But I think all in all, in general, it was my time as an atheist. I never went crazy.
That's good.
I never, went partying, or, the crazy phase a lot of people go through. But I think I just lived life. I was less worried about what people thought. And there was, I guess my moral understanding, or the bar of morality, kind of went a little down, dipped a little bit. But for the most part, and I just lived and didn't care.
I'm sure, at least because you were talking about you're searching for truth and trying to find some version of truth. And I think one of the things I've been listening to about the purpose of our lives is that it's sort of the desire to get back to God, to better understand truth, and that ultimately leads us back to him. And I think that maybe that's why you still had that piece to you, because you're actively searching. You weren't saying, oh, God doesn't exist. You're now learning and trying to decipher, and maybe this was a slow, gentle guidance of the Lord above to try to get you away from that area, and maybe slowly guide you into, because he understands you better than probably you, and he understands us better than we understand ourselves, which is always funny that we fight him tooth and nail sometimes. But it just kind of guiding you, because he probably knew that you'd be a truth seeker and wanting to continue down you and your husband, which it seems like is divine providence that he came into your life, even though he
Yeah.
was an atheist, and now where you ended up. And it's really, it just goes to show, when you start seeking and diving into the truth more, it naturally leads you back to God. And it's good to see that you ended up where you ended up, and where you said your husband, which is really fascinating, that your husband actually introduced the idea of the Catholic Church. Or was it the Catholic faith, or was it just Christianity as a whole?
No,
And
it
then
was Catholic. It was the Catholic faith.
interesting.
My husband loves history, and he loves literature. He's French, and he noticed that whenever he reads literature, there's always a mention of God, but not just God, the Catholic God. You know what I mean? And the Catholic
Mhm.
Church in a lot of French literature. And since he loves history, I mean, and we've always loved. It's a grace that I think God gave us. Luckily, when I moved to France, it was the first time I was surrounded by so many churches, beautiful, beautiful churches. And as an atheist, I would go in because I just thought it was so beautiful. I would just sit and look, especially in the summer, it's nice and cool. It's a good place to just sit and, relax. And I loved it. I always loved going in the churches. So yeah, he always had a desire for learning history. And I don't know. It's because he was reading literature, and there's always a mention of the Catholic Church, and he thought, okay, well, I don't know much about the Catholic Church except for what I know, taught by the public
What you know.
school. Yeah, the public
Yeah.
school of France, which is very, the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, that's what you get taught. The Catholic Church is horrible, and there are all these atrocities, the main ones, Inquisition, Crusades, blah, blah, blah. And so he said, okay, well, I'll just read the Gospels just to see, right? So he did, but he came up to, and he read, before Abraham, I am. And for some reason, he read that, and something like woke him up. And I think that he told me that was the beginning. And then so one day, out of nowhere, my husband comes up to me. He's like, I think the Catholic Church, God might be real, And I thought, like, out of all the churches, out of all the religions, the Catholic Church, like, it's so crazy. It's so backward. Like, it's so anti-woman. That's so anti, the Crusades, the Inquisition, all of that. So that's where it started. But since we had, our relationship was founded initially from the very beginning on a good friendship and open conversation, I was open to listen to him. It took a while, but I was open to listen to him and to look it up myself. And that's how it started.
Awesome. That's amazing. That's a kind of a really amazing that he read that passage and it sort of lit something up inside of him, and then also that you were so receptive to the idea, because that's something, like, I think we as a society need more of, is that you have these people that you love and respect and understand, and in today's society, when they say something that you disagree with adamantly, you immediately push it off as crazy, or they've gone down the deep end or gone off the deep end or whatnot. And it's kind of a showcases of what maybe that's we should be more open to our loved ones and what they communicate to us, because obviously there's a reasoning behind why they are starting to think this, and instead of pushing it off, but start learning why they think this way, picking their brain and understand it, and then maybe that'll us have other people dive into the topic, and maybe they can find out more information why they are more set in their ways of, this is ridiculous, this is not true, or not, but at least have a good faith discussion about it. And that's beautiful to see, because in our polarized society today, it's just, you would see something like that and people would be like, no, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. But that's really beautiful. So now you're kind of interested in the Catholic Church, and so take me from now. You're interested. You're thinking about it. You're learning more about it. Was there something that was it just continuous conversations you had with your husband? Was there something specific that you read yourself that kind of triggered in your mind? It's like, oh yes, this is the church, and this is where I believe truth actually lies.
I think I never had that St. Paul moment, where it's just,
Getting knocked off your horse, or what?
exactly. I wish I did, but it was very slow. And I don't know, perhaps because I am a woman, God's way of speaking to women is through the heart a lot of the times. And so yeah, I did read stuff and I spoke a lot with my husband, talked about it, but I think because we would go visit churches more often, and then he would tell me bits and pieces about, this, like we went to see Sainte Catherine Labouré in Paris. And for some reason, so we saw her incorruptible body. And I was just, I thought it was fascinating that all these people are here and that there's this body that's there. Incorruptible bodies is one of those things that blew my mind. And for some reason at that church, I wanted to buy a rosary. And I went to buy a rosary because I remember seeing them at my grandma's, and my grandma always had one. I think, yeah, one of the things that made me interested back to God were near-death experiences, stories of people who died and came back to life and had remarkable stories. And it's because they are from different parts of the world, and they were atheists as well as believers who have had these experiences. And a lot of the time, well, every single one of them either goes to one place or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come back, they explain. That was a big thing for me. I'm like, there's no way that these people could, make this up. And for what advantage is what I thought. Because people think, oh, that's crazy. They're just making it up. I'm like, yeah, but why? Why would you want to be that person who people would make fun of because you're saying this crazy story? So near-death experiences brought me back, and exorcists. Because when you're away from God, you're very intrigued by evil. That's why
Isn't
people
that fascinating?
I know.
How, like, you're away from God, and then, like, you see the big thing nowadays is like people are interested in, like, even back when growing up, people were interested in like ghost hunting or
Yeah.
a lot of the different exorcisms or demon searching. It's really fascinating that people are so like, oh yeah, I believe in demons, but they can't make the next step. Okay, if demons or these spirits exist, then maybe there's like the ultimate good on the opposite end, which is God. Maybe we should let's guide more of that direction as well. It's just
Definitely
really fascinating because I completely relate with that, where during that phase of my time, I was like really enthralled with just the supernatural, so to speak, and like ghost hunting and exorcisms, and just I couldn't get enough of it. So that's really just, I just wanted to interject there. I thought that's fascinating.
it really is. When you are far away from God, he'll let it happen. He'll let you take a look at evil as one way of getting you back. So exorcisms, interviews from priests who've done exorcisms, things like that. And there was also a man, I think his name is Rodney King. I hope this is his name, but he was a Satanist who became Catholic. He's pretty famous. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure that's his name. And he would explain what would happen during these black masses as well. So people like that too. Testimonies from people who have gone to the darkest places on this earth and have come to the light. That helped a lot in conversion. It was very, very slow for me, and I had to accept it slowly but surely. And it was only later on where I would look up how it's logically possible. Because, yeah, God speaks to you in two ways, in the heart and in the mind. He began with the heart for me. And then later on, I looked up stuff by myself, because I love the Catholic Church, but there is a lot to know. And when you're on the
Yes.
outside, it's just so much. And Lives of the Saints were great too. I remember this one woman, we started going to the Latin Mass, and I was already on my way to becoming Catholic, but there was this woman who would give me little booklets about saints, and then I would just give it to her at the end of the week, every Sunday. And so those kinds of things brought me to the church. And people like Fulton J. Sheen, I remember him coming, popping on my YouTube. I'm like, who is this man? Who is this old man? All right, I'll give him a try. And that charisma and the way he taught, he just sounded so smart. And he knew how to answer difficult questions. And that's why I really liked listening to him. Dr. E. Michael Jones was a big part of this too when I was converting, especially when I was more atheist. Before I was just warming up to the church, because there were a lot of things that were going on in the world, still going on in the world, that I just didn't understand, and he kind of put it together for me. And he's also a really, really smart man. Yeah. Those are a few things that brought me back.
We're back after some technical issues. My end, Alexis end,
My
both
end too.
ends. It's been a little bit of a hassle, but I was gonna say, before this whole rigmarole that we just went through, I was gonna say that it seems like the promulgating idea when you go to like public school or whatever you're being taught, at least now in society, is that people that are religious, they don't have like a cognitive bone in their body, or they're not thinking, or they're kind of like hillbillies of sorts that just don't they don't properly think. And that was really fascinating for me, jumping into the coming back, because I was a cradle Catholic and then went through my secular atheism era, but diving into the theology of it all and the deep critical thinkers, that that brought me back to like, oh, there's a lot of smart people that actually have put a lot of thought into this, a lot more than I actually have. Maybe I should look into it on a more deeper level. And that was what ultimately led me back. And I think another thing that you pointed out earlier that I wanted to touch on is just the fact that we talk about, there's truth when it comes to the church and faith, but I think a lot of things that need to be tied in that we don't talk about, another pillar, is just the beauty can be a way to evangelize to people when their cognitive senses aren't open to the idea, but the beauty of it all can reach a deeper level. And that's what you see with a lot of churches in Europe and some cathedrals here in the States, which there's some just normal churches here, which I think they could make it a little bit more beautiful. But when you compare Catholic churches to, say, Protestant churches on the average here in the States, it's the beauty. It's kind of, you can't match the beauty of the buildings itself, and also the beauty of the process, the liturgy of the Mass as a whole, and just the reverence of it all, that you can't not feel it, you can't not see it, you can't not experience it. And I think that's also another way to evangelize people, which I think you touched on, how you would just sit in churches just because they were beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, you were away from the heat, but also you got to experience the beauty of the church. And that probably spoke to you on the emotional level, which is what you were mentioning, how that's how God talked to you, where it sounded like your husband was more on like the thinking level, but you was the emotional.
It helped connect
initially?
with people in the past for me. I lived in Poitiers, and there's a church there from the 6th century, and I got to go in there. And I lived in Strasbourg, and there's a church there that was 1,000 years old. Okay, and then I live where I am, and there's a church that just turned 1,000 years old. And when you have that physical thing, this beautiful, beautiful church, and you just like man made that. But what would what would impel a man to make something that beautiful? If God didn't exist, what's the point of making that? Why is that there? And that really was something I was thinking about a lot. And it's just, there's nothing, because beauty is a transcendent, right? And no matter what you believe, it will bring you to God. No, you cannot help it. It's stronger than you. And that's why that's something that I wish our Protestant brothers and sisters who are so against images, if they could just only understand that. It's just it opens the doors to people who are not inclined intellectually. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It really is, beauty just can just bring you to God and open your mind up to Him. And yeah, I just wanted to add that. It's just, it was just amazing. Like I'm surrounded by it. And the funny thing is, all these French people who are, because France is now a secular country, majority of people are not Catholic or even believe in anything. They don't realize they're so, because I grew up in Toronto in Canada. And I remember going to Montreal. It was the same experience, because in Montreal there are these beautiful, beautiful churches, Catholic churches. And when you're so out of that, and you dive in, and this beauty just bathes you bathe in it, and it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, you put that a way more elegant way that I could. But what? So now, like, you're interested in the church. What was your conversion like, and how are you now, like, looking back on the whole experience, and do you have one advice for people that are going through the process that maybe were in your shoes before, and give them uh, some, I guess, positives of where you are now, and how you're feeling relative to where you were throughout your periods of life?
So the first part of your question, it was one thing that was hard for me to understand was mass. Like, I didn't fully understand it. And my husband, so our conversion started here in France. Then we moved to Canada. I moved back to Canada with my husband. And so, and it was only in Canada that we started attending mass regularly and seeking eventually a priest. Because we would just dabble here and there from time to time, look and see, watch a mass, and then but it wasn't regular. But it was only in Canada we started going regularly. But for my husband, he's French, so he speaks English fluently. But to him, since God is such a personal, his relationship is personal, it's weird to do mass in English. And so we went to a French mass. But before that, he was like, "Oh, you want to try the Latin one?" I was like, "Why? Why? I don't understand that. I don't understand Latin. I know French eventually." So I was against it in the beginning because I just didn't understand. But to him, English is really weird to speak to God, because he speaks to God in French eventually. Well, yeah. And so we went to a French mass, went to an English mass, French mass. And there was one point, it was just a little too, unfortunately at this parish, it was too Protestant. I was so used to seeing the Catholic Church, the mass, like in the movies. Everybody has the vestments, altar boys, that was like from a
Hmm.
person standing outside looking in. That's what I expected, but it was completely different. And there was one mass we went to. It was just a little too much for me. And for him, it was just there were liturgical abuses basically. And
Mm.
so that day I said, okay, right, I'll try Latin mass. I mean, what harm could it
Hmm.
do? And I remember walking in.
Can't be worse than what you were just coming from.
No, it could not. It could not. And so I walked in. We walked in. Okay, we found a church, a diocesan Latin mass. And we walked in. It was quiet. It was the first time that I heard a church quiet before mass. Usually there were people walking, talking, going in and out of the church. But it was quiet. And then what was amazing was the women were veiled. And at this point, I wasn't completely, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be Catholic. But when I saw them, I said, yeah, I want to be Catholic. For some reason, that image of this woman,
It's
you would think that someone
interesting.
from the outside would think, oh wow, this is so oppressive. Like, why are they, how
Yeah,
can we can how
that's
can
what
we can
I initially
distinguish
thought you were
them?
gonna say.
No,
Yeah.
I looked at them, and that beauty of seeing men and women just blew my mind. It was this grace that came because I looked and I was like, wow, this is still a thing. Like, this is a thing. Like, women veil. And I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And I immediately got a veil the week after. I wasn't Catholic yet, but I got a veil right at the week after. I told my husband, I was like, okay, we're gonna go here every day, every Sunday. And that's what happened. And the most amazing thing. So we go to the first Latin mass ever, and at the end of the service, like, we didn't know what was going on, of course. And then we go outside, and the church, as the service has ended, mass has ended, and there's a priest waiting. And he's like, "Oh, are you looking for Father Roy?" And I said, "Oh, no, we're actually thinking of converting to the Catholic faith." And he's like, "Oh, really?" Like, well, talk to me, kind of thing. And the amazing thing was that his sister is Mormon, and so like he knew exactly, my situation. And I thought it was God sent, basically. I was like, this is amazing. I think so. Even though it was a slow process, I think it was that moment when I saw the women going to mass, and I just couldn't believe it was beautiful. Like, I had no idea. I didn't understand anything during the mass, but it was so different from everything we had seen before. And this desire to go to mass that I didn't really have, it just came. And so we went.
Maybe it was the reason you felt that uh, grace come over you is it kind of brought back, like, you were getting connected with tradition that spanned
Yeah,
back all of ancient history, and that because you were
definitely.
talking about how you connected with that with the churches throughout history, and now you're connecting with the tradition that was passed on in each generation, and you
Yeah,
sort of see now it allows you to visually see the roles that God placed for man and woman in like a visual way, and
definitely.
maybe allows you
Definitely.
to
I think
experience
also
that.
because I was born in the Philippines, but when I was 7, I moved to Canada. And I grew up in Canada. But then when I was 20, I moved to France. And so I've always had, and we moved a million times when I was a kid. And so I always had this feeling of never belonging to a place. But at this point, when I came into the church, I was like, yeah, I belong here. Like, this is home, kind of thing. Which is something I hadn't
Hmm.
felt. I mean, I know that my place physically on this earth is France. I love France, but like, home in the whole sense is the church, and it is something I had
Hmm.
never felt. Not even as a Mormon, as much as I loved being Mormon. It wasn't like when I came into the church and when I became Catholic.
That's beautiful. Is there anything
Oh
to
yeah,
kind of wrap it up to say to provide
yeah.
any like
Advice. That's what I wanted to say.
encouragement
um, take it slow and pray. It's really prayer was a little difficult going back in, but I had I talked about this before. I had a really horrible habit of masturbation, and the only someone told me, well, the priest told me, pray to Mary, and I did, and I kept praying and praying and praying, and Our Lady is so powerful, and it wasn't the only time, but when that happened, it was another affirmation, like, okay, you're right, okay, I have to keep going, the church is true, you know. Uh, just trust in the Lord. It's not, you're not going to know everything even when you become Catholic. That's another thing. There's so much to learn, and just take it, with humility. And since becoming Catholic, I think one of the greatest graces that God has given me, and I think every Catholic eventually, is the grace of charity towards people. I pray for enemies, which is something so weird. Like, as a human being, like, people think like, oh, it's just a made up church, it's a made up religion. I'm like, yeah, but what human being in his right mind would make loving your enemies, a commandment? Why?
And
um,
actively praying for them, because that is like
and actively
one of the
wanting
biggest
good for
signs
them.
that you. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, take it to God. Pray to Our Lady. She will intercede. And yeah, I think that's it. Read a lot too.
Beautiful. Well, I hope that people got a lot out of this discussion. I would love to have you back on to dive more. Maybe we won't have technical issues, but it was still. I really enjoyed learning your experience, and I honestly want to dive more into it. But obviously, we have a time crunch with the time differences, so it's late for you, which I again appreciate you being on, and so I'll make sure to put. Go check out our YouTube channel, and I'll put that all in the descriptions. Is there any final things you want to say before we wrap?
Thank you so much. This is awesome, and I hope God bless all of you.
Beautiful. Amen. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. I always enjoyed all the interviews that I do. If you are new to this channel or this podcast, please subscribe to the podcast or the YouTube channel, whichever way you are watching it. If you are on podcast platforms, listen up. Listen. I would like you to subscribe, obviously, and then leave the podcast a 5-star review, whether you are on Spotify or whether you are on Apple Podcasts. That helps the podcast grow. And as always, just share this podcast with your friends and family. Also, share this YouTube video if you just want to share the YouTube video as well. If you're here on YouTube, that is the best way we can grow this community as a whole. And go to adambuckingham.locals.com if you want to join the community and also support the podcast. So hopefully we can do bigger and better things and have bigger and better interviews, and I can interact with all of you all on a one-to-one basis. So go do that, and until next time, I hope you have a blessed week. Bye.